Well, here we are on the cusp of the 25th anniversary of Wake Forest University's School of Divinity, a quarter century of graduate theological education here on the campus of Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Jill and Bill, what comes to mind as some of those significant moments in the history of our school?
When I think about it, I was remembering today, early on, about the first 3 or 4 years, we had a student retreat up at Black Mountain at the YMCA camp there on the mountainside. And I was remembering when the first year we went up there with students, Dr. James Dunn, who had come here to teach from the Baptist Joint Committee, gave the opening prayer. And I brought it to read today just to give us an idea. This is how Dunn prayed. Oh God, help us to be so full of our freedom in Thee, so literally liberated from the fears and phoniness that damn so much of theological education, that we rejoice even in the responsibilities that ride piggyback on every freedom. And in it all, empower and humble each one of us, professor and student, donor and dean, to do all we do as our high calling of God in Christ Jesus. And across the years, students in the first class have referenced James' prayer to me and probably to Jill, both for its call to freedom in Christ and that it was the first time they ever heard anybody say damn in a prayer. Yeah. And I think both of those relate to something of the identity and freedom of the Divinity School. And we began with 20 students. One got a new job and had to drop out. So we had 19 students, 14 females and 5 males. And many of those folks, particularly the women, some of whom were not college age at that point, had waited on this school because they lived in the region and couldn't leave to get a theological education. That's one thing I remember very, very strongly. But I think that sense of both the freedom of education and the freedom of conscience were two things that forged us.
Good memories. And mine are similar. What specifically came to mind when you asked that question was the fact that of those 20 students, I think all of them were taking some kind of risk, taking a chance on us and on themselves, because maybe they had dreamed of theological education, dreamed of getting an MDiv, maybe dreamed of being ordained, and their life experience hadn't taken them to that place yet. And so they arrived here with us in our dream of creating a school where people would be welcome and they would experience education and formation that helped them to be justice makers and to show compassion, and that they would be able to do reconciling work in this broken world. And, I think over the years that has happened. And I see the faces of some of those students sitting here today as we talk about them. Yes. And I know where they are and what they're doing now. And they're doing work that is justice-centered or compassion-centered as chaplains or teachers or nonprofit leaders. So I think those are powerful memories for me and make me, I think they're the things that made me want to stay. The same things that made them want to come. It's been sort of a risk-taking endeavor all along. And that's a feature that makes us courageous in the way that we go about educating people who want to be religious leaders.
You both mentioned really some big ideas that were foundational to the School of Divinity. Freedom, conscience, courage, risk-taking. We know of some of the large personalities done. Who are those folks that we may not hear about too often, but were so crucial to the founding of Wake Div that we need to remember?
That's great. Great question.
Immediately when you say that, one is, I think two women come to my mind. One is Phyllis Tribble, who was a big presence, both in terms of the reputation she brought as a Hebrew Bible scholar, but also because of her own sort of stage 2 feminism. And a very powerful individual that I think did not stay a long time here, but left a strong imprint with all who came, and who kind of gets forgotten in the retelling or the reshaping or the rewriting about the history. And the other is a woman named Kitty Amos, who worked, both Phyllis and Kitty were associate deans. And Kitty had worked with the Association of Theological Schools and was extremely instrumental in really getting us an earlier full accreditation than we might otherwise have gotten. And I think some other schools were frustrated by that. But she had a sense of organization and identity that she brought to that work in ways that really kept us, I would say, from stumbling with some of the rules and the regulations that we might otherwise have not been as clear about.
I guess I'm thinking about a lot of people who, most of whom probably aren't at the university anymore, but we were really dependent upon the gracious hospitality and welcome of colleagues across the university, the registrar's office and in student health and in all these different places, because we were not doing any of that kind of resource or networking stuff in-house, because we were so dependent on the university. We couldn't have that many staff, and we wanted those connections. And so there were people who really just gave all. Like I say, I don't know that they're here now, but they were people who worked in the registrar's office who were always open to conversation, or people who wanted to provide us with their wisdom about how the university worked about certain things. And so I think they are like in that cloud of witnesses of people who really believed in what we were doing, and they wanted us to make a go of it. So I celebrate all of them. And gosh, if we started naming folks, I know that I would leave someone out, but they are people who are prominent. I can see their faces and think about, the ways that they showed up for us.
Well, we talked about those people and ideas that really make Wake Forest University School of Divinity singular and signature. What were you hoping as a young dean and a young professor starting an entire school? What were some of your hopes? What were some of your fears going into this venture here at this nationally renowned institution and starting a new school at the end of the 20th century?
I'll go back to Jill's word, risk. It happened at that time in the South, because of particularly schools that had a Southern Baptist heritage. Multiple new divinity schools, seminaries were starting up. And we were one of many that were opening. Duke, Gardner-Webb, and Campbell, all in this state, had developed around those ideas. So what would distinguish us was a very important issue, not just in the university, but in the larger field of theological education. And trying to think about a curriculum that was for a new century, as opposed to staying with the old staid and more formal and more denominationally related schools. And we were really at that point where the changes in theological education, where there was a sense of ecumenical and at points even interfaith connections. I think trying to be sensitive to that as a challenge for the future that would be parallel to traditional theological education, but distinct from it.
When I think about that question, what were we hoping?
Yeah.
Well, I had just completed a PhD, so I was hoping for a place. But I was really looking for a certain kind of place because I had been in a pastoral role for almost a decade and in a Baptist congregation. And when I felt like it was time for me to leave there was no place for an ordained Baptist woman to go, to be a pastor, to be a preacher, because at that time we had just hit that place of breaking apart. There was no cooperative Baptist fellowship when I started to experience this in that congregation. And so when I went back to get my PhD, I guess I was hoping that there would be a place where I could feel like I could live out my calling. And as soon as I knew that it was going to be at Wake Forest, a place that I already loved because I'd graduated from here, and that Bill and others had imagined a place where everyone would be welcome and that we would support, racial and gender diversity and ordination of women. And I felt like I wanted to be a part of that because I had experienced what it was like not to have that kind of support in the ministry kind of trajectory the journey I'd been taking. So for me, I was hoping that we could live that out, that we could make that real.
Well, you're making it real at Wake Forest University. Here's a university started in 1834. It already has a graduate business school, started a law school in 1894. The university moves from Wake Forest to Winston-Salem to connect with its medical school that's already here. So you have this divinity school coming and joining this ecology of these graduate professional schools. I was talking with a longtime member of our community about those Magnolia Room dialogues and those conversations about what it meant to open up a divinity school. What were your feelings, or what was your sense of how the faculty were feeling about opening up a divinity school at Wake Forest in 1999?
You mean the existing faculty?
The existing faculty here.
That's a good question.
I think there were some people who were nervous because the trustees approved the idea of a div school in 1989, and then it took 10 years to raise money, et cetera, et cetera. And but in 1986, they broke with the Baptists who had founded the school in 1834. So there were people that I think were worried that, oh no, the Baptists are coming back, and we just got rid of them.
That's probably true.
By that time, the university was moving into recruiting students, one, outside the Baptist world, and two, outside the South. And so I think there were people who were afraid that this was going to bring back a traditionalism and a boundary that they had just gotten out of. And I think that was a considerable concern. And I hope maybe the faculty we had and the direction we went helped put that to rest, at least ultimately, I hope.
Yeah, I agree. I think there were some people who were nervous about it, but on the whole, I think people were willing to give us a chance to live out a mission and purpose that would be sort of resonant with what was already here at the university, including the sense of strong academic quality of the education we would provide, but also, like the rest of the professional schools, helping to form leaders who would really make a difference in the communities where they went to serve. And I think once our graduates started doing that, and colleagues saw that that was happening, and they also realized that there were some people on our faculty who were really great colleagues.
Yes.
For an interdisciplinary kind of approach to whatever they might be doing. So I think over time we were able to build some trust in those relationships. But I don't remember anybody being really vocal or adamant about that. Just maybe a little nervous about the whole Baptist history part and the, religious kind of identity. What sort of religious identity were we going to have? And how would it influence the rest of the campus?
Well, we've talked a bit about the founding and that context. And the Divinity School now is 25. And those middle years, I know, Bill, you served 10 years as dean, and then we had the late Gail O'Day come in. Let's talk a bit about those middle years where you're now filling out the Divinity School, you're bringing in new faculty, you're seeing a change, a demographic shift in the student body. At one point, it was roughly about 20% African American. That grows up to 40%. And you really see a flowering of the Divinity School. Talk a bit about those middle years. Bill, you become the first Dunn chair here. And Jill, eventually you will serve as interim dean and as acting dean and as vice dean. And I call Jill is the fourth dean here. Part of the deanery here. Jill has served as dean. So talk about a bit about those middle years of where the Divinity School was. What was its ethos? How had it changed? And how had it changed with the life of the university?
I think that settling into an identity is what I think of when you talk about the middle years, of deciding who we are. And we said what we wanted to be. And then in those years, we were trying to say, this is who we are and this is what we're about. And I think that's reflected in some of the people we invited to campus to speak about Christian identity and non-Christian identity as well. And to lay out what we hoped at that point in time was the future of the church and where it was going, and to try to read the culture in general and the church culture in particular. And this is really before everyone started noticing the nuns or the nons that were disengaging from church. But it was also a time of in between the declines or changes in the traditional denominations, where schools and our mission statement had said, we are Christian by tradition, ecumenical in outlook, and, drawing on history, Baptist in heritage. But we never were a Baptist seminary. And laying that out and recognizing that the lines between denominations were changing very quickly, and that many of our grads might actually, once ordained, wind up in situations through multiple denominations. And that's really part of what I think in those middle years we started responding to.
Yeah, I also think that as we grew, the community became more cohesive in a way, and students learned what it meant to come into a learning community like this and be transformed, not just intellectually or in terms of leadership skills that we might be teaching them, but in terms of their very way of understanding their humanity and how they relate to other people. And I think that was the thing that I was hoping would happen with the diversity that we said we wanted and that we were aiming for. And as we became more diverse, I think we realized a couple of things. One is it is really powerful and wonderful, and it is really challenging, life-giving, hard work. And it's work that's worth doing, because I think students who have encountered that in those middle years and beyond have brought some of that to the work that they're doing in whatever context they're in now, whether they're in a hospital chaplaincy or hospice or wherever they are. So I think it's work that has mattered and that the students kind of bought into that, many of them, and let it change them. There's something very, and that's part of the risk taking, but also being vulnerable to that. How do we invite students to make themselves vulnerable to the possibilities of being transformed?
We've talked a bit about those wonderful virtues of Wake Div, of freedom and risk-taking and being courageous. One thing that I've always found is that there's a great bit of having fun at Wake Div. What are some of your fond memories of those moments of fun? I know we were talking a bit about one earlier, but what are some of your memories of the fun times at Wake Div? Some of those fun moments and nuggets that we can remember that you'd like to share.
Sure. Well, the retreats were fun. Of course, there's some that we aren't going to share. But I think part of becoming a community is, and being able to grieve together means we have to know how to laugh together. And I think we tried to learn what that meant. And students can be so wonderfully playful in the classroom. I know we did some case studies and things where students would present those case studies and they would do it in a just wonderfully playful kind of way. It was serious too, but they recognized that there was something about that needed to be have a layer of humor to it so that we could really grapple with the meaning, the depth of meaning. And so I have memories of some of those wonderful opportunities of play, role plays and that kind of thing that they tapped into.
Yes, and the energy that came from the diversity, particularly as a variety of racial connections and representatives were present. And that often, at points in worship, that created some tension, particularly when the more charismatic students and the more, I won't say high church, but traditional church students. And we had a kind of bumpy time in those middle years about how are we worshiping together and whose voice and whose style of worship will be developed. But once we settled into that then worship became both, not just both, but energizing and with a great depth to it, but also with great fun and people who could laugh both with and I think appropriately at each other, even in terms of our most solemn moments. And those were rich experiences as well. And then I think that spilled over into classes as well. And people would, just bringing Krispy Kreme donuts and show up with a dozen or two in the box. And when you have Krispy Kreme and you get a sugar high, you're just naturally going to have fun.
Well, I know I love it when the students just sit around in the admission suite and just tell stories.
Oh, and there's a lot of that, yeah.
About just their day, their experiences. And you can hear laughter. I hang out in the hallway with students, and it's those informal spaces around our building where students are just hanging out and enjoying one another and enjoying the beauty of community. And you can hear that laughter. And I love the story that shared that the lower level, as we now call it. Sometimes we call it the lower auditorium. We're trying to find a name for it, but those students in the early years called it the crypt.
They sure did. Yeah.
And you go down there and it reminds you of an old, the children's area of an old Baptist church.
It does. Yeah.
And you're like, yes, this has crypt-like qualities.
Yep.
But our students, they make life of it, and they make it a loving, hospitable place. And you can just go down there and sit.
That's true.
You don't have to say anything, and that becomes the beauty of Wake Div. We've talked about the past a bit. We talked about those enigmatic moments that really have made Wake Div the place that it is over the course of a quarter of a century. Now we look out into the long future. There are any number of things that we can highlight in terms of our social, political, economic, and even planetary lives and existence. What's your hope for Wake Div as we move forward into the next quarter century and as Wake Forest University moves into its third century, beginning in 2034? What's your hope for Wake Forest University School of Divinity?
Well, I think that I hope we can sustain the kind of diverse community that we have, become even more diverse, whatever that might mean in this iteration, and sustain that kind of life-giving, life-transforming way of being a learning community together. I know that over the time that I've been here, these 25 years, I've definitely been transformed and transformed again. I mean, it's an ongoing reality. It's almost like a birthing process, where you're being birthed I feel like I've been being birthed for 25 years. And I hope that we keep doing that with and for each other, because the world is such a broken place, and we need people who have that gift of courage and community, support, laughter, that they can go out into the world and do hard things, but do it with care and love and energy that, I don't know, maybe takes people by surprise, but also invites them to join in some kind of way. And I think we have students doing that, and so I hope it continues. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. And I also think my hope would be that the School of Divinity can continue to energize students who see both the need for and their ability to respond to the gospel and ministry, whatever form it takes, through the gospel. Because I think for myself, I think that's one of the greatest challenges divinity schools in general and this divinity school in particular face. One, because so many younger folks, Gen Zs, have been the focus of some of this, are disengaging from religion in general and Christianity in particular. And two, because there are forms of Christianity in the culture now that are driving more people away than drawing people to them. Churches in this country are in desperate need of re-energizing. And the church is always reforming, but it's an uphill struggle right now. And when I see the students that are in the school now, I find great hope, because and I appreciate, I'll go back to where you started, their riskiness, not necessarily with the school, but with the church. And being able to undergird them and strengthen them and give them the energy of the Spirit to do this thing is I find it really exciting, but
I guess
challenging.
I guess I want to know what you think about that, Corey, because I feel like the future is yet to be, that story's still being written. And I think most of that future story is going to be written by somebody other than me, because
I'm the old guy.
and I don't mean that in but it is like exciting to me to think that there are generations of people who have written this story. So I'd like to know what you're imagining.
And I agree with that. And I'll just add, I have thought this since I met you, but even more so since you've come into the dean's role. You have a vision for what must be done in order to carry theological education toward that future. I have no doubt of that.
Yeah.
And
and you use two phrases. I'll invite you to reflect on. One is you like to talk about the long future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
what?
That's a hopeful view, eschatological view, and I know that you like to talk about making things legible.
Yes.
So those are the two things I would think about and want to hear from you.
So we have two L's, the long future and making what we do legible to a broad public, and that includes our university colleagues. And I guess the L that would complement that to make it a proper trinity would be love. And what your witness and your testimony, when I go and I look in the archives of this university and explore the history of the School of Divinity, along with the history of Wake Forest, despite its flaws and all of the ways in which we've done things wrong, we have done some things right. And those things that we've done right have been powered by an expansiveness of love, not only of the institution, but a love of people who we don't know yet. And it is that aspect of the Divinity School, that openness to a love of people, as Ayikwe Armah would say, of the beautiful ones who are not yet born, that we continue to do this work. And it is that love that I sense in the community now, our colleagues, our faculty colleagues, our tremendous staff colleagues, and most importantly, our students. Our students are our greatest recruiters. It's never a day that goes by where a student will come by and say, well, Dean, I've asked one of my friends to come by the school. Or they've invited someone to come in. We have folks who want to come in and audit classes, even in 2024, that the big questions of life, the answers are not exhausted. The book is not complete. The song is not finished. But if we continue to cultivate that capacity to love, and a sense that it becomes about our dwelling, this is how we dwell with one another, then that's my hope. And it's that vision and that feeling. And I don't talk about love a lot. We can do an analysis of where we need to go, but it's grounded in that very vision that I hear in conversations with both of you. I see in our history. And I hear when we come together and worship on Tuesdays, or when we come to worship as a university. It is love. And as long as we have that motto of Pro Humanitate will mean something even more, because it is between that Chi and that Rho. And it is a love that gives until the end of all time. And that's my hope. And with your vision and with your testimonies, your life's testimonies, I know Wake Div will be great into the long future.
Well, amen. I'll go with that hope.
I will too.
You giving an invitation? I'll come.
Yes.
I'll recommit.
All
Yes,
right.
we'll rededicate our lives.
Yeah.
The doors of the church are open.
That's right.
As I would say about many colleagues I've had over these years, for whom all for different reasons. I'm very grateful. We've had a great group of folk.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for you and your leadership. So thank you.
Yes, I too. I have a sense of the wonder of the future
Yeah.
that you sense and
Yeah.
and you are putting into practice.
Yeah.